you share a little bit about your story and what you've gone through when it comes to addiction and why you're passionate about recovery and helping people become uncovered?
Yeah, I think, for me, it's a mix of my own tragedy and trauma that I've been through. And I realized that in my own story of getting the addiction going in my life really comes from my family and the trauma that we had been through with my parents and my family, my sibling. I've lost, two brothers and a sister, all tragically, two by overdose, one by, a horrible accident that happened. And it caused my family to really spiral and led me to be looking for some type of affirmation in other places. And it came in the form of addiction and sex and drugs and alcohol, and really led me to being completely lost and isolated and alone, and to the point where eventually, I tried to take my own life. And then after trying to take my own life, it was just a matter of, even though it didn't succeed the first time, when would it succeed? I knew that somehow I was going to die by suicide. And I began to live that out in my life, whether it was through the addiction, whether it was through mental health issues, and led me to eventually become homeless and on the streets facing total depravity, until one day I finally cried out to a God that I knew existed but didn't believe loved me, and he met me in this miraculous way, and really led me to this understanding of salvation and grace. But along that journey, I was in and out of many churches where I felt like as long as I fit their profile of what I should look like or act like, I was good. But the moment I didn't, I was cast out. And it didn't match up to the Jesus that was being explained to me. It matched up to more of what I saw in the world. Eventually, when my total, transformation came in the form of this little old man called Pops that showed me grace and showed me love and showed me transformation, I began to really know Jesus. And when you know Jesus like that in this powerful way, there's nothing you can do aside of helping others to see that same Jesus. And so for the last decade, that's what I've done in the ministries I've started. And it's really been about understanding that the love that comes from a Jesus that died on the cross for us is the only love that can help people ever find wholeness. And it's been such a big part of my journey that it's led me here today.
I love that so much. It's just because when you encounter Jesus and even the community that's around you, experiencing the power of wholeness when it comes to addiction. And Britt, I just want to ask you, why are you so passionate about helping others when it comes to mental health issues and suicidal thoughts? Tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. Well, like George, I have my own story. I have my own journey that I'm walking through. And although George and I came from very different backgrounds, very different upbringings, it's possible really for anyone in the world and in the church to struggle. I grew up in a Christian home. I knew all of the words to say. I think I prayed that little sinner's prayer when I was about 3 or 4 years old in a little Nazarene church in Central Ohio. And I think I meant it. But I'll tell you what, I had no idea who Jesus was. I had no idea that God loves me the way that he did until I was in my mid-30s. And I had to hit a point of crisis before that came. Now, I struggled with my mental health. I struggled with addictions and compulsive behaviors and an eating disorder for, 17 years before it all finally came full circle in my adult life. I nearly lost my marriage. I nearly lost my career, nearly lost my daughter. And it got to a point where I said, this life has become completely unmanageable. I had to walk out my own recovery journey, and just understanding that the ways in which we come to the ends of ourselves, they do not discriminate. They can show up anywhere in the church. And rather than cling to the upbringing that I had that said, it matters if you look really good on the surface, but it doesn't matter if anything's going on inside. Let's go ahead and push that further down, look good on the surface, because we're here to minister to others. That was broken off of me in a very, very powerful way in the context of authentic, healthy community that allowed me to show up and say, do you know what? I'm not okay today. It needs to be okay that we're not okay. And it needs to be okay for us to let go of some of the labels and the stigmas that are surrounding addiction and mental health problems within the church so that we can all acknowledge the truth. And that's really that it's trauma deep within all of us that's causing us to struggle in the first place. We, the church, are uniquely suited to show up with as Jesus with skin on and solve this problem.
A lot of people can say, I can relate. I've been right where you are, and releasing that shame and releasing that stigma. And George, I just want to let's talk and unpack a little bit the difference between recovery and uncovery. Can you share that with us?
Sure. When we typically think of recovery in the way that it's been for the last 50 years, it's been about trying to recover the person that before they got into addiction, before they went into mental health issues, we're trying to recover that person and then make them a better version of that. But the reality is that person was never enough to keep them from falling into a destructive lifestyle. The uncovery is a different way of looking at identity as a whole. Truly, if we look at who Jesus, calls us to be, before the foundations of the world, God said we were holy, perfect, and blameless. That identity that God gave us before the whole world, everything was created. It's such a beautiful picture of that identity is something that if I can uncover that, that is something that will keep me from living in destructive patterns. Recovery often ends up being about behavior modification. It ends up, here's what you do, here's what you don't do. Make sure that you look this way, act this way, talk this way. Uncovery is not about behaviors. It's about an understanding of who we truly are. And if you look at like the root cause of addiction, it's separation, right? Because addiction is a way of compensating from not being connected to other human beings. And so we're trying to fill that void with something. Where if we understand fully who we are in the eyes of God, our creator, the one who gave us a destiny, the one who gave us our life, then we can be connected to the creator himself. And therefore connection has been made in the most perfect, powerful way. That's the type of uncovery, which is different than just recovering some false identity that would have never kept us in the first place.
Well, even from a mental health perspective, people have been struggling pretty much since the beginning of time. Adam and Eve struggled in the garden. The Israelites struggled when they were in Egypt under unbelievable oppression. So what we have really unpacked in the book from a theological perspective is looking at it saying, you know what? If we have been raised in an environment where we believe we're slaves, it's going to take a whole lot more than prayers and platitudes to convince people that they're not only free, but they're family. And so when we talk about that initial sobriety, these initial moments and days and even years of abstinence from a substance or abstinence from a specific type of behavior, this is just the beginning of a lifelong recovery journey. So that initial moment of sobriety is really no different than that initial moment of salvation. When we pray that sinner's prayer, when we invite God into our heart and into our lives, it is the first step on a lifelong journey of transformation. And we want people to understand that who are struggling, and those who love and lead them, we want them to understand the journey as well.
When you put people into a position where they're right from day one respected, that they're honored, that they're loved, and that they're seen for who they are unconditionally, people begin to see themselves that way. And instead of trying to force people on day one to memorize Bible verses, instead we show them the love of Christ by calling them friend, like Christ says in John 15. He's like, today I call you friends, right? And that is such a big part of when you're dealing, we only deal with guys that are the worst of the worst, that they've been in and out of rehabs, that they have nowhere else to go. They are the hardcore heroin addicts. And that's our group, because that's the group that knows that like, this is it for me. I got nothing else. And I'm going to make this work because I have a group of people that want to love me and support me and be part of me making this work. And because of that, all of a sudden we have men that are 3.5, 4 years sober on average. My leadership staff currently has 7 years each. And that's all hardcore heroin addicts, 7 years sober. The longest sobriety we have is a guy that has 11 years. And we have 3 of those.
So we have our spirit-led theology. We think we know what we're talking about here. How have you been able to integrate that with scientific understanding of addiction and bring the science of addiction and the things that many times the church is maybe held at arm's length? How have you been able to integrate those both?
Wow. Well, this is a mindset shift that is important not only in the recovery space, but really in every bit of the theology space. The truth is, God created science. They've never really naturally been at odds with one another to begin with, but I understand that there are cultures and there are especially some generational pieces that the ideas of taking medication in order to support your mental health or your sobriety, sometimes that is looked down on. And oftentimes, the big lies that we will hear, honestly, is that Jesus should be enough. And even if Jesus is enough, we know that he is enough. We know he's Jehovah Rapha, our healer. There are times when our heads cannot catch up with our hearts, or our hearts cannot catch up with our heads. We as the church need to step in and be willing to meet people right where they are. The scientific community does not see us as a threat. Not at all. There is scientific research out there now, even by agnostic researchers who see the benefit of a faith element in a recovery programming. Even science loves God. So I'm looking at it saying, do you know what? If we could suspend disbelief, even for a moment, for those people who need additional support to get to a base level where they can begin to encounter a God who loves them so unfathomably, who are we to stand in their way? And most importantly, let's stop bullying them to the altar. Let's stop trying to exorcise demons out of them without their permission. This is not the role of the church, and that was never the gentle way of Jesus. So it's an opportunity for us, church, to suspend disbelief for a moment, to begin to have meaningful discussion with people in the scientific community. It's incredible what we can learn from one another. And who knows, you might even get to share the gospel with a doctor. It's pretty cool.